Susan was asking me at the beginning a couple of minutes ago how I'm going to tell when the time is up and it's time to open the floor for questions, because she's very concerned that I do that. And so I told her, well, I don't know, what do you think? And, Bill Schmidt was in the room at the time, and he comes up and he says, hold up a sign. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to speak until I see the sign, which means either we're going to have a very long speech or we're going to have a religious miracle today. Can you say hallelujah? Thank you, Susan, for that introduction. I was once introduced to an audience by a lawyer who came up to the stage, and he had his hands in his pockets, and he came up and he said, I want to introduce you to two very rare creatures indeed. That's Michael Hinkson and Roselle, survivors of the World Trade Center terrorist attacks on 9/11. Well, I was struck speechless by this thunderbolt of an introduction, and I didn't know what to say. So when I got to the stage, all I could say was, it seems to me that we had a much rarer creature in our midst, and that was a lawyer who kept his hands in his own pockets. Ooh, any lawyers coming toward me? As Susan said, I am Michael Hinkson, the author of Thunderdog, The Story of a Guide Dog, A Blind Man, and the Triumph of Trust. The story is about my life and what I've been able to accomplish, and of course it is the story of me surviving in the World Trade Center. And at the time of 9/11, my guide dog was Roselle. This is not Roselle, this is Africa. Effie, come here, turn around, and you need to talk to the audience. All right, come here, come up here, come. Oh, come here, come on, up, come on. There she is. This is Africa. Wave. Good girl. Africa is a 6.5-year-old yellow Labrador retriever from Guide Dogs for the Blind in San Rafael, California. Oh, we have a partisan crowd here today. Since 9/11, I have traveled the world speaking and talking about lessons of 9/11, talking about trust and teamwork, moving from diversity to inclusion. We'll talk about some of that this afternoon. Mostly talking about life. And I love it when, after I speak, people have the opportunity to ask questions. As I look at the questions that people ask on a regular basis, there are two that are very common. People who have read Thunderdog say, you rode a bicycle? How did you do that? Excuse me. The other question that is asked of me on a regular basis is, if you had the chance to regain your sight, would you do it? And this morning, I want to talk about that, because I think that it's not only a fair question, it's a question that really goes to the heart of everything that I believe in and everything that I talk about. So to answer the question, I'm going to take a long way around and tell you about my life, tell you about my experiences, and then come back and give you the answer, which I think you may be able to guess by then, but maybe not, because the answer may surprise you. So I was born in 1950. That was the time when the baby boom era had begun, and there were a number of births of premature children. Children who decided to get into the world early. We all heard about all these different boomers yesterday and the things that they want, and if you were in the development conference in the morning, and I can tell you, I think I fit into that category. But I was in a hurry, and I came out 2 months early and weighed 2 pounds, 13 ounces, and really haven't gained a lot of weight since then. I'm skinnier than I was. I'm working at it, too. I was put in an incubator and given too much oxygen, although at the time my parents didn't understand the ramifications. But 4 months later, my aunt discovered that I didn't react to being carried over to a window with bright sunlight, and she said to my mother, I think he's blind. So my mother and father took me to the hospital. The doctors examined me, and they concurred that I was blind. The doctors told my parents to put me in a home, to send me away, because after all, no blind person could amount to anything, and that if I stayed at home, I would only destroy the family and any relationship they might have with my 2-year-old brother, because a blind kid wasn't worth it. My mother had a high school education and was a beautician. She had a beautician's license. My father had an 8th grade education and actually lived a lot of his life alone. He went to the war. He met a friend named Sam Keith, who had a sister-in-law that my dad started writing to, saw her picture, kind of liked what he saw, came back from the war, proposed, and they were married. And 4 or 5 years later, I was born. But my parents, with their less of an education than the professionals, my parents said, that's not right. We're not going to send him away. He can do whatever he wants. He can grow up like anyone else. You guys don't know what you're talking about. Now, these are the same doctors, I must say, who had heard of the concept of, at that time, what was called retrolental fibroplasia. And Dr. Arnold Patz at Wilmer Eye Institute and Johns Hopkins University here in Baltimore, I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Patz a few years ago before he passed. Dr. Patz had already discovered that if you didn't put a child in a totally 100% pure oxygen-rich environment and even subjected them to air for a short time, the incidence of blindness dropped to 0. But when he submitted applications for grants to the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation, the letters that he got back said, what you're doing can't be pure science and real science, because after all, everybody knows you can't have any problems and you can't be poisoned by oxygen. Science, schmiance. Anyway, the bottom line is that a few years later, medical science did recognize what Dr. Patz had to say, but my doctors had not bought into it at the time. My parents weren't bitter. In fact, in years since, many people have asked me, why didn't you sue those doctors? They blinded you. And my response, which was the same as my parents', was, why? What good would it do? Could I win some money? Yeah. Would have won some money. Would it bring back eyesight? No. Would it fix anything? No. Would it ruin other people's lives, the doctors who were doing their best at the time? Possibly. It wasn't worth it. So we never did. And I've never looked back, because I don't think that's the way to do it. So my parents took me home, in any case, and brought me up like my brother, having to do chores when I grew old enough to be able to do it. We lived in Chicago at the time, South Side. We knew all about Big Al. Very close to Geraldo Rivera's warehouse, the thing that he found years ago. For you baby boomers, you might know about that. But the bottom line is that, that I lived in a fun neighborhood for us at the time. I was there till I was 5. I walked to the candy store with my cousins and my brother and spent time playing. I had a little pedal car that I rode around our apartment until one day when I crashed it into a coffee table. Still have the scar from it. I can feel it. I had to go to the hospital and get 3 stitches. And when we were coming home, my mother, instead of saying something like, we're taking your car away, you're just not safe with it, she said, you got to watch what you're doing. You got to be more careful. And I learned what that meant. I learned, although it took me a long time to articulate it, to see is not what you do necessarily with your eyes. To see means to perceive. Look it up in the dictionary, sports fans. You all think that to see means with your eyes. It doesn't. It's not the only way. And I grew up realizing that eyesight isn't the only game in town. That in fact, eyesight causes more blindness in our world overall than anything else you can subject people to. And I'll make my case for that in a minute. We moved to Southern California when I was 5 years old. I learned to ride a bicycle and drove around our neighborhood, drove the neighbors to distraction. We were in a pretty rural area, but I learned to ride. I learned, although we didn't know the concept, I learned the idea of echolocation, listening to the sounds around me, sometimes even snapping fingers or going and listening for the echoes. And from that, getting a very good picture of my environment to the point that I could ride a bike like anyone else. Rode the bike to school, rode the bike around the neighborhood. I remember one day coming into the house after having fun on my bike, and I found my dad on the phone. And if I were to kind of paraphrase the whole conversation, as I came in, my dad said, yeah, he was outside riding his bike. And I asked my mom, what's going on? She said, oh, somebody's calling to complain about you. I was 8. And this person clearly said to my dad, well, what's he doing riding his bike out in the neighborhood? Well, what's wrong with him riding his bike out in the neighborhood? Well, he can't do that. My dad said, well, why not? And this person on the other end said, well, no, I'm not talking about your older kid, the one that can see. I'm talking about the blind one. Well, what's wrong with the blind one riding his bike? What's the problem? Well, he can't see. So what's wrong? Did he have any problems riding his bike? No. Did he crash into anything? No. Was he having any difficulty? Was he causing any problem for anyone? No. Well, then what's the problem? And they hung up. But what was the problem? The problem wasn't me riding the bike. The problem was the concept that somebody had that I couldn't ride the bike and that they wanted to impose their will and their misconception about what a blind person could and could not do. And that was what it was really about. Because we as a society think that because you're blind, you are not as capable as the rest of us. We do it in every action that we take. We really don't believe that a person who is blind is truly as capable. Intellectually, emotionally, we don't think it as a society. And that's what I faced. I went to high school. I was even removed from the school bus because we had a bully of a superintendent who said, at that time I'd gotten my first guide dog, Squire, a lovely 64-pound golden retriever. As he was described to me, a very dark amber color, almost red, a wonderful personality. Squire learned early on how to clear sidewalks, especially if there were girls chatting in the middle of the sidewalk taking up space. We were walking down the sidewalk one day, and I don't know exactly what happened, but somehow Squire's cold nose touched a bare leg, and you should have heard the screams, and the sidewalk cleared. The result of that was that every time we walked down the sidewalk, Squire had his nose ready, and if there were crowds in the middle, he would go to the girls, and we would get through. And I know I almost got hit in the head many times. Squire thought it was a great game. But we always got down the sidewalk. Anyway, the superintendent told me I couldn't ride the bus anymore because I was blind and I had a guide dog. That was my first exposure to discrimination. My dad hit the roof. He did research as we demanded a meeting with the Board of Education in Antelope Valley. My dad discovered that they were violating the law. We already knew that there were state laws that said that a blind person could not be denied access to any public transportation, any lodging, any public accommodation, any common carrier. If they used a guide dog, they could not be denied because of the dog. What my dad discovered with his 8th grade education, as he read Black's Law Dictionary, was that a school bus is classified by case law and by fact as a common carrier. We went to the school board. The chair of the board was a gentleman named George Cartosian, who happened to be the person who presided at my Star Scout Court of Honor because I was in the Boy Scouts of America, and at that time was still a Star Scout, about to become Life, on my way to Eagle with 2 palms and Vigil in the Order of the Arrow, but we won't go there today. No bragging here. In any case, Mr. Cartosian was the chair, and when it came time to hear the case, he called the superintendent up, and the superintendent said, hey, we have a rule in this district that no live animals are allowed on a school bus. And my dad got up and said, well, that may be, but there is a state law that says that if a person is blind and has a guide dog, they are allowed on any common carrier. And by the way, Black's Law Dictionary says that a school bus is a common carrier. And oh, by the way, The state law also says that if a person or an organization denies access to a blind person with a guide dog on any common carrier, someone will have committed a felony and must spend a year in jail. The superintendent turned to the chair of the board and says, "Is he right?" Because Mr. Kartosian also happened to be a lawyer. And Mr. Kartosian, I remember it, Mr. Kartosian said, "Yep." Yet the superintendent won. The board voted 3-2 to support the superintendent. It took weeks, but my dad wrote a letter to the governor of the state of California. And my father explained the case in detail with his 8th grade education. We don't know what happened, except that one day the superintendent was called to Sacramento. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall to hear the discussion. I don't know what occurred, except the next week I was back on the bus. The lessons I learned from that were 2. 1, people don't deal with me the same as everyone else simply because I'm blind. 2, you can fight City Hall and win. And so I went on through high school. I went to college, got a master's degree in physics from the University of California at Irvine. I know how to talk about confluent hypergeometric equations and Lagrangian dynamics and Schrodinger's wave equation and even about Schrodinger's cat. Anybody know about Schrodinger's cat? And all that neat stuff of physics, although I don't really use it today in the same way. But I did learn some lessons that stuck with me from physics, even without going through all the math and so on. Lessons about detail, lessons about how to live your life, ironically. And so after college, I went to work in the outside world. My first job was working for an organization called the National Federation of the Blind, which is an organization of some 50,000 blind people who all believe that blindness isn't the handicap. In fact, if I put it in terminology that may work better for you all, what I learned is that you have as much a physical disability as I. What I learned was that the problem is you don't recognize your physical challenge because technology has fixed it for you. You don't recognize that you're light dependent and that your light dependence means that you don't do well in the dark. Thomas Edison made the electric light bulb so that you light dependent people have a reasonable accommodation which allows you to deal with mitigated life function in the dark. And I don't say that in total jest. The reality is, you guys don't do well if you don't have lights. So why do you judge me because I don't happen to be light dependent? Why is that an issue? It's an issue because you guys really still do legitimately deep down in your heart believe that there is a difference between being blind and being sighted. And there is. I don't see with my eyes and you do. But you don't see the way I do. And why is one considered better than the other? Well, I know why. Because there are more of all y'all than there are of me. But the fact of the matter is, why do we assume one is better than the other? The ideal is to understand both, to truly understand both. And I learned that. My first job was working with the Federation which was asked to help with the development of a device called the Kurzweil Reading Machine for the Blind. This guy named Ray Kurzweil in 1974 came to the Federation. He said, "I got this device that'll read print out loud to blind people. It can take any magazine, anything you got, and you can stick it down on this here machine and it'll read it." And like most of the technologies that the Federation hears about from the standpoint of a lot of blind people, yeah, sure. But he was pretty insistent and pretty genuine, and so some people went to visit him in his laboratory. I was still in school, getting my master's degree and a secondary teaching credential at the time. But they brought their own stuff, and if it didn't read it. A machine that would truly make it possible for blind people to read any print. Just like there was a machine that made it possible for any sighted person to read at night. Light bulbs. Technology is technology no matter what it is. Anyway, the Federation and Kurzweil worked together. I was hired to travel the country, putting machines in various places, helping blind people learn to use the products, going back and collecting data, and finally developing a series of recommendations for Ray Kurzweil that he could use to develop a true production model of the machine. And in 1977, that machine, well, 1978, early 79, that machine came out. By that time, our project was completed, and Kurzweil hired me to continue to do human factors work inside Kurzweil Computer Products. So all my furniture, which had been in storage, was brought to Boston, where I set up housekeeping, went to work for Kurzweil, and about 6 months later, I was called into the office of the VP of Marketing and said, we got a problem, we've hired too many people, and we're going to have to lay you off. Because we love you, your job is great, but we have to eliminate some positions, and yours is one of them. But there is one possibility. I went, okay. Because I really didn't want to leave. I had just moved 3,000 miles away from home. He said, you could go into sales. But we don't want you to sell the reading machine for the blind. We want you to sell the commercial version that we developed so that lawyers could scan thousands of pages of documents and put them in computers. Publishers could use it to look at old books and then republish them. Newspapers could use it to create morgues of all of their hard copy and put it electronically into some sort of a database. It was cool. I wasn't being asked to be in the blindness world. I was being told, we value you so much in reality, and we know of your capability so much that we want you selling this device to the public in the non-blind world. And I thought about it overnight, because I didn't know whether I wanted to lower my standards and go into sales. And I decided, well, at least I wasn't being asked to be a lawyer. No, I don't, not really. I thought about it, and I went, oh my gosh, look at what they're asking me to do. How could I say no? So I went and took a Dale Carnegie sales course, learned some things along the way about sales, and went to work selling this product. So what did they give me for a sales territory? New England and Canada. I'd never been to Canada, eh? Sorry. And loved it. I did. Then in 1979, 80, early in 81, I was asked to move back to California because Xerox and Kurzweil had been talking, and it became a fact that Kurzweil was going to be sold to Xerox. And I was asked to go out and help with the integration of Xerox and Kurzweil on the West Coast. But I had lived there. So I moved back to the West Coast, bought an apartment, a condo in Santa Ana, and started working with Xerox and Kurzweil and selling the product. In 1982, I met a woman who I got pretty interested in. Her name was Karen Ashurst. Karen was in a wheelchair. And as I learned very quickly, I always loved to say she had the cutest wheels in town, and I decided that we really ought to get married, and she decided we really got to get married. I was 32, and she was 33. I married a younger man, she did. But we knew what we wanted, and we got married on November 27th, 1982. Celebrated our 30th anniversary last November. We knew it was going to last because on the day of our marriage, we were in the church waiting for people to show up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Nobody showed up. There was like about less than half the church. 4:05, 4:10, 4:11, we're in our little rooms waiting. We were supposed to start 11 minutes ago. 4:12, the doors burst open and everybody comes into the church and the wedding started. So 15 minutes late, but it started. And later we started asking people, why was everybody so late? Oh, well, we were all out in the parking lot waiting for the end of the SC Notre Dame game. Okay. But the important part of that was SC won. So we knew the marriage was going to last. Karen was an SC grad. So I worked for Kurzweil until the beginning of July of 1984. Xerox had taken over the whole company, and my thanks for that was that although I was the last one, I, along with all the salespeople who had worked for Kurzweil before the company was taken over, were asked to leave, and our jobs were eliminated. And they brought their own people in. So I went looking for a job and couldn't find one. I applied to all sorts of companies to sell this new product of optical character recognition. I had a great sales record. I even tried to apply to companies who were making speech synthesis products and finding ways to put that out into the public eye, and I was denied because I was blind. It didn't matter what my resume showed. So in 1985, I started a company called the System Connection, and the purpose of the System Connection was to sell computer-aided design systems to architects. How about that, a blind guy selling graphics to architects, huh? And what I learned early on was I didn't have to run the product. I had to know how to run the product, so I could sit an architect down in a chair in front of a machine and say, what do you want to draw? And then say, here's how you start. And work with them to the point that by the time all was said and done, a couple of hours or 3 hours later, they did the work that would normally take them weeks to do, of having a full building design and then be able to do three-dimensional walkthroughs and fly-throughs with light sources in the right place so that they could see this whole building. And I said, look what you just did in a few hours, and you can still charge the same price, by the way, because you can still create the same picture, so who's going to know? Which is the whole point of CAD. And I did that for 4 years, and then I was hired, because I wanted to go back into the regular workforce, I was hired by another company. But that wasn't an easy challenge to overcome, because again, I had the fear. What am I going to do when I start putting out my resume? Do I say I'm blind? Because if I say I'm blind, as I discovered, I won't even get requests for an interview. If I don't say I'm blind, I might get requests, but no one will like me because I, in their eyes, misled them. I didn't say I was blind. I was talking to my wife about it one day, and she said, you know, what is your problem? You took the Dale Carnegie sales course. What's the most important thing that you learned in that course? Well, of course, I wasn't sure exactly what she was thinking of was the most important thing, but I said, so what? She said, the thing you preach to me all the time, turn liabilities into assets. Ooh, the light bulb went off. And I then went in and wrote a letter as a cover letter for the resume that I was sending to this company that we were responding to an ad from, an ad in the newspaper. And I wrote to this company, and the last paragraph of the letter that I wrote went something like this. There's something in summary that I need to tell you about myself, and that is that I happen to be blind. The reason I'm telling you this is because as a blind person, I have had to sell all my life just to survive. I've had to sell to be able to go on airplanes. I've had to sell to be able to convince someone to sell me a house or rent me an apartment, or sometimes even go into a grocery store because I travel with a guide dog. So when you're hiring somebody for this job, do you want to hire somebody who just sells for a living and goes home at the end of the day and it's all done and said? Or do you want to hire somebody who truly understands the science and art of selling for what they really are and sells all the time because that's what life is about? I got the interview and I got the job because of that letter. I worked for Articon for 8 years. In April of 1996, they asked me to go back to New York and start an office for them, which we did on the 23rd floor of Tower 2 of the World Trade Center. And so there I was. The first day I went into the World Trade Center, I started thinking, oh my gosh, wasn't this the place that was bombed 3 years ago? What am I going to do if we have a disaster here? I was the Mid-Atlantic region sales manager. In fact, I was the East Coast region sales manager for that company. I hired people, I brought them in, and I started learning how to travel around the World Trade Center. And I learned what I had to do if somebody decided to have an emergency at the World Trade Center. And literally every day I went into that organization and into that entire set of buildings, I thought about, what am I going to do if there's an emergency today? I had that subconsciously in the back of my mind every day I went in there. And I think I should have had that. I think anyone that goes into a building should be able to know and think about, what am I going to do if I have to get out? In physics, we call it paying attention to the details. That's one of the most important things that I learned in my career in physics. My professors would probably say, that's a really important thing, but we wanted you to remember a whole lot more about the mathematics of physics. And I would say to them, the philosophy is even more important than the math. The math only bears out the philosophy. Pay attention to the details. I was recruited away. I went to work for other companies, and finally in 1999, I was asked by Quantum Corporation to work for them. I had been working for a reseller at the time, a company that would buy their products and sell them. Quantum made all the products that people use to back up data, all the tape backup systems, all the hardware, and some of the technology from a software standpoint that was used by Wall Street to record all their sales transactions every day and then put them on tapes and take them to a mountain in New Jersey. You ever been to New Jersey? What they call mountains? We don't even call them hills in California. I lived next to a town when I was in New Jersey called Mountainside. We were in Westfield, New Jersey. And Mountainside was called that because it had a mountain. It was 300 feet tall. Quartz Hill, where I lived in Palmdale, was taller than that mountain. But okay, everybody has their own perceptions, and why destroy them? I hope nobody from Jersey gets too offended. But I was in New Jersey for 6 years, and I'll prove it. I was off of 135 on the Parkway, you guys. So I also, about that time, had to go for my 5th guide dog. My 4th guide, Linny, had worked with me for 3 years and became ill. I had to retire, so I went to guide dogs for the blind in November of 1999 and got Roselle, a Labrador Retriever, a fun-loving, cute lab who fit my requirements at the time. When Guide Dogs for the Blind asked what I wanted, I said I want a dog with an on-off switch, a dog that knows how to focus and knows how to play when the time is right. And Roselle was perfect for that. So in 1999, I got Roselle, and in August of 2000, we opened a new full regional office for Quantum on the 78th floor of Tower 1 of the World Trade Center. 78 floors is pretty high, although the building was 110 stories tall. The building was so high that on the 4th of July, people would come to our office to look down on the fireworks displays in New York. We opened the office. I had staff. Again, I followed my procedure of knowing everything I could about how to get around. I knew the shortcuts in the World Trade Center that most people didn't even have access to, cutting through parking lots and so on to get from one place to another. I love to challenge my employees and other people who didn't know the complex as well to races about who could get somewhere faster. And I would say, you go your way, I'll go mine. And I'd be sitting there taking a nap when they show up because I knew the shortcuts. And I had the badge that allowed me to use them, by the way, which was the real cheating, sneaky part. But I knew how to get around. And I knew everything about what to do if there was an emergency because I took the time. I knew my employees wouldn't. They figured they could read the signs on the wall. That's going to do you a lot of good in a smoke-filled corridor. But I couldn't convince them to pay more attention to the details. Sort of the same thing like going on an airplane. You know, you go on an airplane and what happens? You sit down and they give you this lovely briefing. If there's an emergency and so on, you'll be able to get to the emergency exit rows because there's an emergency floor lighting system that will light up and show you the way. Yeah, right, that works in a smoke-filled aircraft. And how do I know it's really going to come on? So I always took the approach of asking the flight attendants, well, all that's really well and good, but I want some information, like where are the overwing exits from where I'm sitting? And the reason I ask that even today is they're always changing the configuration on a body. You know, they just never keep seats in the same place exactly. So I would ask. And the flight attendant's response, by the way, I love to sit near the front. And I often, as I flew more, got upgraded because I had enough miles to do it. But I love to sit near the front. I know airplanes don't back into mountains and it's probably better, but it's quieter in the front. And I'm lazy. So the flight attendant's response to me was, oh, you don't need to worry about that. Just remember, you came in through the front door and you're in row 8, so you just go up 8 rows and get out. I said, no. Where are the overwing exits? Well, you don't need to know that. I said, yes, I do. No, you don't. You're going to go out through the front. I said, look, let me try to help you out. What if the door is jammed? Oh. But you don't really need to know it because it won't be. I said, what if it is? What I learned was they didn't know the row numbers. And they didn't want to take the time to go find out. Who's really security conscious, folks? They should know that, and they should be telling every passenger that information. It should be part of the verbal briefing that everyone gets. You don't know who's listening and who's not listening to those presentations anyway. Southwest does the best job of giving those from anyone. I was on a Southwest flight once, and the flight attendant got up and she started out and she goes, now, you know, we need to talk about the safety aspects of this aircraft, and I want you to understand something. There may be 50 ways to leave your lover, but there are only 6 ways to get out of this airplane, and if you know what they are, you better listen to me. I made the flight attendants go get me the information. And some of them were very upset. And if we really got a chance to talk about it, usually they went away with a different idea of why they needed to do it. Because the information I needed was the same information that every person on the aircraft should have. Period. And the fact is, you're not going to get it necessarily by looking for it, and the flight attendant should be making sure that you have it. Anyway, I looked at all of the processes of what to do in an emergency, because I couldn't rely on being with employees to get out of the World Trade Center. I couldn't rely on them being able to see signs. I participated in fire drills. I did all that stuff because it was the right thing to do. On September 11th, 2001, we were going to be having a special series of seminars for employees of other companies who worked with us, our resellers, to teach them how to sell our products. These employees were to come in and be part of one of 4 seminars. I got in about 7:40 in the morning. I had planned to be there earlier, but things never go as you plan. And at 12:30 that morning, we had a thunderstorm. It was a doozy of a thunderstorm. It was the first time that we had ever had a storm that really came straight over our house. The thunderclaps were like bombs. Roselle is afraid of thunder. We went down to my office in the basement. Roselle was under my desk shivering away and not really being able to cope with all of this. I turned up my stereo. I started printing some stuff that I needed for the seminars. I decided to do it at home rather than doing it at the office so that the Braille embosser would make some noise. None of it helped because God had a sense of humor, and he brought that thunderstorm right over our house, and it got really noisy. But we survived it, and at 2 o'clock we went back up to bed. Then we got up at 5 to go into New York. I got to the train station only to find out that the subway was broken, and we were delayed a half hour, but I finally made it in. I got to my office, and about the time I got there, a person from the Port Authority cafeteria on the 44th floor arrived, and he was there to bring food that we had ordered. He came in and set up. I started working with people to get everything set up, and finally all was ready. Some early arrivals had come. David Frank from our corporate office had come. David was there because he had account responsibility for some of the people who were in that day, and we were ready. Our guests were eating. At 8:45 in the morning, David and I were in my office doing some final preparations for the seminars, and suddenly we heard a muffled explosion. The building started to shake, and then, for those of you who can see it, I'm holding my hand vertically. The building started to tip, and I'm tipping my hand toward you very slowly. It just started tipping and tipping and tipping. We literally moved about 20 feet. What we didn't know at the time, that's the one thing the fire preparation folks never told us, although I should have realized it, that buildings like that are big, tall springs, and they're made to be able to be buffeted and actually be hit by an airplane, like the Empire State Building was in the 1940s. The building kept tipping. I moved over to the doorway. I grew up in Palmdale, California. I knew building moves, go to doorway. So I stood there. Big deal. The doorway was in a non-bearing wall, and you're on the 78th floor. If it goes down, the building's going to go on. No, standing in a doorway isn't going to help. But the building kept tipping. David and I were talking about it. What's going on? We had some early arrivals. There were 5 people in our conference room. They were just there being very quiet. David and I said, what's happening to each other? And finally, David and I said goodbye to each other because we thought we were about to take a 78-floor plunge to the street below. And then the building stopped. I should tell you that David was holding on to my desk. Roselle was asleep under my desk at the time, and we left her there. And David stayed where he was. I was where I was. The building stopped. We held our breath, and then suddenly it slowly started moving back the other way as I'm now moving my hand back toward being straight up and down. And the building kept moving, and finally it got to a vertical position. And as soon as it did, I went back into the office, and I met Roselle coming out from under my desk. I took her leash, and I told her to come around on my left side by giving her the command to heel. Come here. And heel means to come around on the left and to sit, which is exactly what she did. And about that time, the building dropped straight down about 6 feet. Now, the physics of the situation was, although we didn't think about it at the time, only did later, hey, it was a spring, right? The spring went back to its normal configuration, and that's what the building did. But we didn't know that at the time. All I know is that as soon as the building stopped moving, David released his hold on my desk, turned around and started shouting, "Oh my God, Mike, there's fire and smoke and millions of pieces of burning paper outside our window. They're falling. The building's on fire. We got to get out of here right now." And I said, "Slow down, David. No, we got to get out of here right now." Our guests began to scream. They started moving toward our exits. "Slow down, David. No, we got to get out of here right now. There are millions of pieces of paper falling outside the window. The building's on fire. I can see fire and smoke above us. We got to get out of here right now." And again I said, "David, hold on, slow down, we'll get out." And then finally the big line, "You don't understand, you can't see it." I heard the paper falling outside the window. I wasn't smelling smoke, but I believed David. You're not going to make that up. The building tipped, for heaven's sakes. All of that happened. I believed him. But I was observing something that David wasn't, because I was seeing things that he wasn't prepared to look at. I saw sitting next to me a dog who was wagging her tail and yawning and not giving any indication at all that she was afraid. You've read stories about animals that got their humans out of buildings because they sensed fire or something ahead of the humans. Roselle wasn't giving me any of those indications. I'd been working with guide dogs at that point for 37 years. I knew the process. I knew what to expect from the dog. And if she was afraid of something, I would have known it. And she wasn't giving me any indication of fear whatsoever. That told me, by definition, that at that point in time, we could try to evacuate without panic. I finally got David to focus, and I said, "Get our guests to the stairs. Let them out or take them to the stairs. Then you come back and we'll leave." And he did. I called my wife, Karen. It was about 8:47 in the morning, long before the media got the story. I said, "There'd been an explosion or something in the building, and we have to get out." And so we did. David came back, we swept the offices, we went to the stairs, and we started down. Almost immediately, I began smelling an odor, and I realized this is a familiar thing. I'm not sure what it is, but I smelled it before. It took me a while to realize that I was smelling the fumes from burning jet fuel. I did a lot of travel for my company. I've been to lots of airports. It took me a while, but I realized I'm smelling burning jet fuel. We must have been hit by an airplane. And I observed that to people around me, and they went, "Yeah, you're right." Now, it's funny. I've had countless interviews by the press and talked to countless people about this, and they said, "Well, of course you didn't know what happened. You couldn't see what happened." Excuse me. The airplane hit on the 96th floor on the north side of the building. We're on the south side of the building on the 78th floor. Nobody saw it because the last time I heard about anything like that, we had never invented Superman's X-ray vision for real. No one knew. It had nothing to do with blindness. But that's how people made themselves be comfortable. Oh, you couldn't have known because you didn't see it. They couldn't accept it was preparation. It was doing what they should have done, or what they should do if they were in the same situation of being in a building like that, blind or sighted. So we went down the stairs. We passed and were passed by burn victims. We traveled down, and finally at one point David said, Mike, we're going to die. We're not going to make it out of here. And I just said, stop it, David. If Roselle and I can go down these stairs, so can you. And I deliberately snapped at him in my best teacher's voice, manager's voice, because I wanted him to snap out of whatever he was doing. We didn't need panic on the stairs. And David did. He told me later that that brought him out of his funk. And you know what he did? He did one of the most incredible things, I think one of the most heroic and certainly innovative things of 9/11. And he never gets a lot of credit for it. David walked away from me. He walked down a whole floor below me and then suddenly started shouting out whatever he saw on the stairs. Hey, I'm on the 48th floor. Everything is good here. 47th floor, no problems. I don't see any obstacles. Everything is good. He was shouting up to me to give me advance warning of anything. But he was acting as an advance scout for the hundreds of people above him and even the people below him who could hear his voice. He gave them something to focus on. He helped thousands of people, I believe, not panic and never knew it. At least at the time. It wasn't why he was doing it. He was just doing it for me. 46th floor, everything is good. 45, hey, I'm at the 44th floor. This is where the Port Authority cafeteria is. Not stopping. 43. Meanwhile, I'm a floor above him, and I'm telling Roselle forward to go down 10 steps, then turn left and left again, and then go down forward 9 stairs, left, left, forward down 10 stairs, left, left, forward down 9 stairs. I'm sitting there going, wait a minute, I see a pattern here. We're 19 stairs between floors. Ooh, I wonder, how many stairs are we going to go down? I had to have something to keep my mind active because I was worried too. And I don't count steps. I just don't do that. I also don't listen to sighted people when they're telling me how many stairs we have to go up because they're never right. You blind people out there, am I right? Because they always are sitting there going, okay, it's 4 stairs up, but they never count the top step. Or 4 stairs down, and they never count the bottom, and you're sitting there going, We've learned how to be every bit as good an acrobat as Nick Walenda, I got to tell you. I'm sure that we could make it across the Grand Canyon on that cable, because if we started to stutter step, we'd still make it. Because of what you guys do to us. So, David was helping so many people. I was focusing on Roselle, and I knew I had to sound confident for her because I didn't want her to think I was worried. Because if she did, she'd start looking back at me, are you okay? And I needed her to focus. It was conscious. There was a point on the stairs when people started being very quiet, and I went, oh, I don't like this, so I better deal with it. And I said to people, hey, you guys, you know, they're not going to let us back in this building right away, but when they do, let's all meet on the 78th floor and walk down the stairs together on our first day back. What do you think, huh? Great way to lose weight. But also, I was really concerned because people were not going to know what to do if we started to have a problem. We had power and lighting on the stairs. And I knew that all my light-dependent friends would really have a world of challenge if the lights went out. And so I said to them, in my best flight attendant voice, now if the power and lights go out, I don't want anyone to worry, and I spoke loud enough for anybody who could hear me, who would be able to and would focus, would do so. I said, look, if the power and lights go out, don't anybody worry. My name is Mike. I've got my guide dog, Roselle, here. I'm blind. Don't worry. We're offering a half-price special to get you out today only. I knew that some people really would listen to that, and if we really did have a problem, they would be able to go, oh, wait a minute, the blind guy's here, and we would be able to keep order and get people out, and we would. We didn't have the problem. We got to the 30th floor. Firefighters started coming up the stairs. We met them. They stopped, and they said, hey, we're going to send somebody down with you, and I said, no, you don't need to do that. I just came down from the 78th floor. To not prolong it, we had a long discussion, and I really didn't want their help. I didn't want somebody to grab me by the arm and be trying to lift me up as I'm walking down the stairs and all those sorts of things, and I didn't need that help. And I finally said, look, I got my sighted friend here. It was the only way to convince him. David and I are walking down the stairs together. We're good, because at that time I'd gone down to where he was. And the firefighters let us by. I told them I had my guide dog, and she was going to help us, and before they finally left, and they started petting her. Roselle started giving kisses, and I didn't give them a lecture about this isn't the time to pet a guide dog, the dog's unharnessed. I also Didn't try to give them a lecture about, let's talk about the real issues concerning blindness, I just dealt with it, and they went on, and as the first fire guy left, before he did, he petted Roselle one more time. Roselle gave him some kisses, and then he was gone, possibly having received the last piece of unconditional love he ever got in his life. Now, I didn't want their help, mostly because they're a team, and I didn't want to break up their team. I didn't want it on my conscience that somebody wasn't where they were supposed to be if the firefighters had a problem. We went down, we got to the bottom, we got outside, and then we left the World Trade Center complex. We went over to Broadway, and we started going north on Broadway, and we got to Ann Street, which put us diagonally right across from Tower 2, and we were there when suddenly Tower 2 collapsed, 100 yards away from us, and it's a 400-yard tall building. Tower 2 collapsed. David ran. Everybody started running. I took Roselle and bodily lifted her up, turned around and started running myself back the way I came, now running back toward Fulton Street. And as we ran, Roselle focused. I worked with her. We kept running. We got to Fulton Street. We turned right on Fulton Street, caught up to David. David had stopped realizing that he had left, and he apologized when I showed up. He said, I was going to come back and get you. And I said, don't worry about it. Let's keep going. And we ran, and then we got engulfed in the dust cloud. All the dirt and debris from Tower 2 collapsing. We started inhaling all that dirt and junk, which still affects me today. But we ran into that, and we kept running, and realized we had to get out of that dust cloud because we were starting to suffocate. We kept looking for an opening on my right-hand side. I kept telling Roselle, right, right, right. I was listening for an opening, and suddenly I heard it. And I turned right into the opening. Roselle turned. She took one step, and then she stopped dead, and she wouldn't move. Now, I've been focusing and working with her. She wasn't acting afraid, but she stopped. There must have been a reason. I reached out a foot. It's great that this is here. You guys did this very well. And I reached out and looked at the wall, and lo and behold, she had stopped at the top of a flight of stairs. She did her job perfectly. We went down, and we were in the area for about 10 minutes or so. Then a police officer came and said you had to leave. We went with him up and out and discovered that Tower 2 was gone. I can only describe the sound of the tower falling as kind of a freight train and a waterfall sound, the glass tinkling and breaking, and then the clatter of metal, and then the white noise of the building collapsing. Now it was gone. I asked David, what do you see? And he said, all I see are pillars of fire and smoke, hundreds of feet tall. We turned west on Fulton and continued to walk for a while. And then suddenly we heard that freight train waterfall sound again, and we knew it was our tower collapsing. We were far enough away that we thought we were safe from debris, but David looked and saw another dust cloud coming, and so we ran to get out of its way. And after it passed, we opened our eyes, and David looked and said, oh my God, there's no World Trade Center anymore. I had tried to call Karen when we were standing at Ann Street, and I wasn't able to get through, so now I tried again, and this time I got through. And she's the one who told us that 2 aircraft had deliberately been crashed by terrorists into the towers, 1 into the Pentagon, and a 4th was still missing. We had been minding our own business, and now it was all gone. To make it short, the media got the story, and we started getting very visible. And one of the first things I heard after all of that was that there was discussion, because a few people with disabilities had died in the towers. Somebody said, we ought to pass a law that says that no person who has a disability should be able to work above the 1st floor in a building in New York City. And it was serious. So I happened to be at a meeting one day, and I said, I think it's a great law. I think we should pass it, but I only have one small amendment, and that is that we don't make any building taller than 1 story. Then what are you going to hit? Why is that any less logical than anything else? Because people have weird ideas about disabilities and blindness in specific. And I submit to you blindness in specific. The Gallup Polling Organization has proven that 76% of all people fear blindness over any other disability, and blindness is one of the top 5 fears we face. Your organization is the foundation fighting blindness. That's not the fight to have. Don't fight blindness. Fight retinal disease. You should. I love it. I support it. I would do anything to help. But blindness isn't the problem. Blindness may be the result, but blindness isn't the battle. Every single time you talk about what a blind person can't do that a sighted person can, all you do is marginalize blind people. All you do is create more fear among people who can see it. It's great for fundraising, but it definitely has a detrimental effect on our efforts to make it more possible for blind people to achieve their potential. Every time I hear about a child who has some eyesight, who may or may not learn Braille, but they're not encouraged or demanded to use Braille, even though they can read print, if they put their books up to their face and they can read it at 10 or 15 words a minute, people don't recognize that the value of Braille is that that same child could learn to read it hundreds of words a minute. And they get a true written language that allows them to be more competitive, because we are so tied into eyesight is the only game in town. I can't tell you the number of ophthalmologists I've heard about who say to their patients, because I've heard about it from patients and ophthalmologists, the patient loses their eyesight because an ophthalmologist couldn't save it. We didn't have a cure for that retinal disease, and they became blind, and the ophthalmologist says, we failed. You didn't fail because the person went blind. You failed because we didn't give you yet the tools to cure the retinal disease. That's reality. That's what we have to deal with. But you know, with all of that, if I had the opportunity to see again, I wouldn't trade anything for my life that I have had. But I'd love to see again, because I subscribe in a stronger way to the Judy Collins song, I've looked at life from both sides now. I haven't had that opportunity. You haven't had that opportunity. You have never looked at life from the standpoint of a blind person who has been held to the same standard as you. And there aren't that many of us who truly have been held to the same standard, who know that blindness isn't the handicap, it's our attitudes that are the true disability and barrier that blind people have to functioning in society. And you folks, even though it is not the mission of this foundation to deal with that, it is, I believe, your moral and social obligation not to make it harder. And the reality is, you could create programs and do all the fundraising that you want without affecting and without compromising what we need to do to create a higher standard for blind people. And in reality, if we do it right, we all could work together. But blind people aren't held to the same standards, so we don't get the same information and we don't get the same opportunities. That's not because of the blindness, that's because of the attitude. We need to change it now. We need to make it possible for blind people not to be in a situation where the government can allow organizations to pay us less than minimum wage, which is legal today. We need to be in an environment where no insurance company can do what insurance companies did for many years, which is not allow any blind person to get life insurance, because they thought that blindness was a risky business and anybody who was blind had a higher chance of dying earlier, even though they had not one single solitary actuarial statistic to prove it. And it took years to fix it. We need to change the attitude that allowed Target not to create their websites so that a blind person could use it. And by the time that finally got settled, it cost Target $8 million, but it should never have happened. Target should have been willing to provide that information and make their websites accessible in 2000 to 2007. And rather than paying $8 million to get it done, they should have been willing to do it, because what they would have done for blind people, they would have done for dyslexic people and so many other people who don't use graphics, and certainly who can't read print on a website, who use auditory or Braille or other kinds of input. This is the time to make the change. This is the time to recognize the battle isn't blindness, the battle is retinal disease. Blindness may be the result, but we all deal with that. And it isn't all retinal disease. But don't fight the wrong battle. Work together, help us, and let's make the changes that we need so that we truly, anyone who is blind, and I don't mean totally, but who has some eyesight, help us deal with making sure that everyone has the same opportunity and held to the same standard as everyone else. If we can do that, this will be a better world, and you'll find you'll get a lot more funding and you'll get a lot more support from unexpected sources to help cure those retinal diseases. I'd love the opportunity to see again, because I want to look at life from both sides. But I would not trade anything for my life, because as it is today, that defines me. And if I could learn to see and get eyesight back the way you all have it, that would allow me to get even a greater perspective of life. And it would show me how you live and how I live, and allow me to be even a better source of information to help you help all of us. Come, let's work together and truly make it a better world for everyone. Thanks very much.
That was wonderful.
Now,
Are you going to take questions? Okay.
Now, I started a new church a few years ago. It's called the Church of I Don't Do Hands. So we're going to do questions, but I just make it a policy never to acknowledge people raising their hands. It's just a God-given talent. But if you have questions, I'd love to answer any question you have. There is no question that's off limits. We are going to also do a breakout session this afternoon. I hope everyone will come, although I really don't want people to miss other sessions, but I'm prejudiced. So I'd love to take any questions that you have. No question in the world is off limits. Anybody? I have been asked questions by the toughest in the business, and I don't mean the CIA, they're wusses. I'm talking about, I spoke at a third grade class once, and this kid gets up after class, when I took questions, this young man gets up, and you know how guys are, right? So what does he say? How do blind people have sex? So come on, don't be shy.
We need a microphone up here.
It's okay.
Nobody back in the scholarship section?
Did you
Come
have
on,
a
you guys.
question? I have a little question.
Yes. Microphone.
Corey, go ahead.
Hi, I have a question about your guide dog. After the dust cloud, how did that affect your guide dog's health?
Well, it did, although we didn't know it for a few years. She contracted a disease, an immune-related disease called immune-mediated thrombocytopenia. Anybody want to spell that? IMT is a disease where the immune system attacked the blood cells, and we believe that it was because of 9/11. We were able to put it into remission, but eventually she died from a morphing of that in 2011. But even so, she was 13 and a quarter. So she did live a pretty full life. She retired from guiding in 2007 and then was just the boss of the house.
Good question. Mm-hmm.
Is she a good spotter or what?
I still have partial sight.
Mm-hmm.
Limited but partial. I can't read street signs and so on. You say when you were leaving the World Trade Center, you went to Fulton Street. How did you know it was Fulton Street? You made a right. You went so many blocks. Did you have to memorize all this, or how did you know where to go? In the same sense of the word, when you go onto a bus, an airplane, a subway, any other means of transportation, how do you know where to go, when to be there, and so on?
And that's a really good question, and it's a two-part answer. Yes, I did memorize it. I had to. I needed to develop my own map because I didn't have any other way to do it. But today, it's different. Because we've gotten iPhones. And oh, by the way, Apple wasn't originally going to make that accessible. And I won't go into the story, but they did because they were compelled to, or they would have been sued like Target. But the iPhone became accessible. We have talking GPS systems. We have a lot of technology that we didn't have 12 years ago. I wouldn't have to do as much memorization today, but in reality, it's better if I do that in an area which I'm going to travel on a regular basis. The more information I know, the more details I have, the more effective I can be. So yes, I still memorize things. I learned how to travel around this hotel in just a couple of hours because that's what I have to do. I can't rely and shouldn't rely on being guided. That's not the way it ought to be. I should be held to the same standard as everybody else. And face it, here's the handicap that sighted people have. You guys look at all these signs that tell you where things are. Again, what are you going to do if you're in Penn Station and the power goes out? There are no windows there. You're not going to be able to move around. I'll be glad to walk you around for a modest fee. And I don't really mean to sound arrogant, but what I'm trying to say is, yes, I memorize stuff because I should, and that's the standard I hold myself to. But I also go to unfamiliar areas all the time. I traveled to Tokyo last year. I traveled to the Netherlands. I even traveled to Alabama, and you know. And the advantage of Alabama is that I have a U.S. map, so I can get around Alabama because my GPS system tells me. And I will use all of those tools, but I do memorize where I can because that's the standard I've learned to live by. I want to know. I don't mind assistance. I don't mind people saying, do you want help? Although people assume I need help when I don't necessarily need it. We don't assume that about people who can see because we don't know the signs to look for or ignore them. But the reality is we all need help from time to time. And I will take it when I need it, but I need to be the one to know that. In the meanwhile, I'll memorize, I'll hold myself to the standard that I use, and I think everyone should do the same because eyesight isn't the problem. Yes, you've been able to see. Yes, the techniques are now different for you. Doesn't mean you shouldn't learn to use them because if you do, you can be as effective and as functional and as vibrant as you were before. Next question. And while we're finding a person, if we have time for one more, the book that we talked about, Thunderdog, we are selling it outside, and I hope you'll all come and buy it because Africa told me to tell you, you know, we've got to find a place to get kibbles this afternoon, and we can't afford to buy them if people don't buy books. So help a poor starving dog, help her get some kibbles, help her be able to buy her ticket home, and help a poor starving author who doesn't want to carry all that stuff back with him. Oh, good. Another question.
When you go on, fly on an airplane, does your dog have to go through the metal detector?
You bet. And I don't take the harness off. What I actually do is make the leash very long. I actually bought a nylon leash that I attach to the leash, the normal leash, so that I walk through, the leash is very long, the dog waits until I call her through, but that way I don't set off the detector, and so I don't need to be searched. And they never bring up, and when they want to search me, it's never a female that does the searching, darn it.
Yeah, right.
But the dog will set off the detector because I'm not going to take her harness off and all that. And she loves to get searched by all the TSA people. In fact, I always tell them she prefers the searches to be at least a half hour. And that's okay. They love it, you know, and it's a way to make friends with the TSA people. And their job is such a thankless one. If we can make it more fun for them, I'm always glad to do that.
There's someone else on the other side.
All right, one more question. But really, by the way, Thunderdog, we have it in audio and print. The audios are $19.95 and the print is $16.95. We take credit cards and all that. Well, we don't take credit cards because it's your credit card, but we'll use it to charge you. Next question.
Thank you for an excellent presentation and the clarity of how to live life with what you have. What compromises do you accept in public? Examples being, do you compromise on what meal you select in a restaurant Do you compromise in going to the bathroom in an airport? What compromises do you accept?
None of those. No more than you would. I will compromise and accept assistance if I need it. I'll ask for it. I have no qualms about asking for help. That's a compromise in a way, but maybe not. It's the way I live my life. But I'm certainly not going to compromise on what I choose to eat. The only reason I might be careful about what I choose to eat is if I want to make sure I'm not going to spill something on a tie. I tend not to eat really creamy pastas if I can avoid it. Like nobody should, you know. So I'll put a napkin over the tie and stuff like that. But I don't make those kinds of compromises because I don't need to, and I shouldn't. I should do it because I need to in a given situation. But again, that has nothing, absolutely not a single thing to do with blindness. That may have to do with my clumsiness or not, but that's not a blindness issue. That's an abilities issue that we all have. How many of you have spilled things on dresses and ties in public? And don't say you haven't. You know, we all have those challenges. So no, I don't make those kinds of compromises. And I will tell you, when I get off airplanes, I often look for bathrooms. Sometimes I'll compromise and not go to the bathroom on the airplane because too many people have been there. But actually, it really doesn't matter. But no, I don't. I don't choose to make those kinds of compromises because that's not a blindness issue. I don't think that there is a lot that I have to compromise about because I'm blind. The only real compromises are because information isn't made available to me. And we're going to talk about information more this afternoon. But when it isn't available, I'm going to have to ask for assistance. I'm going to have to ask for somebody to interpret that which is available to you and not to me. And that's okay. I don't mind. Well, I think we're going to have to stop. I've been now speaking for 1 hour and 9 minutes and 18, 19, 20 seconds. So we will stop. But I hope you'll come out and buy Thunderdog. I hope you'll come to our session this afternoon. And you know what? Let's all work together and make this a better life. We can do it. I believe that blind people are victims of the Latin fallacy, post hoc ergo propter hoc. You know what that is? Any of you Latin people? Sort of my spin on how to interpret it. That which has occurred is the result of what has occurred before. People's ability or how they function and behave as blind people is not because of the blindness. It's because of the access we've not been given. And that's the problem. I want to quickly end by reading you something. This is called Guide Dog Wisdom, Lessons I Learned from Roselle on 9/11. And I want you to remember these, and you'll get it when you buy the book. Number 1, there's a time to work and a time to play. Know the difference. When the harness goes on, it's time to work. Work hard. Others are depending on you. Number 2, focus in and use all of your senses. Learn to tell the difference between a harmless thunderstorm and a true emergency. Don't let your sight get in the way of your vision. I am not visually impaired. I may not have eyesight, but I believe that my vision is as good as anyone's in this room. Number 3, sometimes the way is hard, but if you work together, someone will pass along a water bottle when you need it. And that happened on the stairs in the World Trade Center for Roselle and me. Number 4, Roselle's favorite, always, but always kiss firefighters. Number 5, ignore distractions. There's more to life than playing fetch or chasing tennis balls. Number 6, listen carefully to those who are wiser and more experienced than you. They'll help you find the way. Number 7, don't stop until work is over. Sometimes being a hero is just doing your job. Number 8, the dust cloud won't last forever. Keep going and look for the way out. It will come. Number 9, shake off the dust and move on. Remember the first guide dog command, forward. Number 10, when work is over, play hard with your friends, and don't forget to share your favorite bow to bone. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much.